This video explores how Luc Besson fused sleek French crime style with Hong Kong fight choreography to reinvent Jason Statham as a modern action icon. By unpacking the transporter's disciplined hero, elegant visual language, precision driving, and obsession with rules, we reveal why this focused formula became a lasting blueprint for 21st-century action cinema, influencing countless films while proving that discipline, identity, and unmistakable style outlast blockbuster trends. Still, our goal is to demonstrate that the transporter deserves recognition, as far more than an entertaining relic of the early 2000s. It stands as a crucial turning point where East Asian martial arts precision merged with refined European action aesthetics to create a fresh cinematic language. By examining its meticulous choreography, unforgettable oil-slick garage fight, disciplined storytelling, and surprising reversal of familiar damsel-in-distress conventions, we will uncover how the film reshaped the presentation of hand-to-hand combat, just as Hollywood was beginning to rely increasingly on CGI spectacle over practical physicality. There was a strange moment in the early 2000s when action movies seemed convinced that bigger automatically meant better. Hollywood had spent decades worshipping impossible muscle-bound heroes, then suddenly shifted toward another obsession: digital spectacle. Gravity became optional. Explosions became louder. Fights became faster, yet somehow less convincing. Characters floated through the air, bullets bent around corners, and computer-generated effects increasingly replaced the feeling that someone was genuinely risking their body in front of the camera. Audiences were amazed, but something quietly disappeared. The weight, the impact, the unmistakable thrill of knowing that what you were watching actually happened. Then, without fanfare, a bald British former competitive diver with a raspy voice drifted a pristine black BMW 735 through the winding streets of the French Riviera as if physics itself had signed a contract with him. Jason Statham wasn't introduced as a superhero. He wasn't dressed in tactical armor or carrying futuristic gadgets. He wasn't delivering theatrical speeches about destiny or saving the world. He was simply a man behind the wheel, calculating every corner, every gear change, every second. The camera didn't ask you to admire impossible computer effects. It invited you to admire precision. That difference changed everything. While blockbusters chased increasingly elaborate CGI spectacles, from the gravity-defying chaos of the Matrix sequels to the exaggerated gadget-filled action of Die Another Day, the transporter stubbornly believed something almost old-fashioned. A perfectly timed punch hurts more than a digital explosion. A real car drifting through narrow streets creates more excitement than a computer-generated chase. A body colliding with concrete carries a truth that visual effects can imitate but rarely replace. And at the center of this philosophy stood Frank Martin. His entire life could be summarized by 3 simple rules. Never change the deal. No names. Never open the package. They're not just professional guidelines. They're a complete worldview. Every successful delivery depends on discipline. Every job survives because emotion never enters the equation. Rules create order, and order keeps people alive. It's the kind of premise that feels almost mathematically perfect. Until it isn't. Because only minutes after establishing himself as the ultimate professional, Frank Martin does the one thing his own code absolutely forbids. He opens the package. Inside isn't stolen money, secret technology, or a priceless artifact. Something alive. And in that single decision, the entire foundation of his carefully controlled existence begins to collapse. Why would a man defined by absolute discipline break the very rule that made him legendary? That question becomes the engine driving everything that follows. Before we answer it, though, listen carefully. The roar of the BMW's straight-six engine echoing through Nice. The precise downshifts before every corner. The synchronized rhythm between steering, braking, and acceleration. The opening bank heist escape isn't just an action sequence. It's a statement of intent. Every tire squeal, every perfectly judged drift, every narrowly avoided collision tells us exactly what kind of film this is. Not one built on digital illusion, but one grounded in craftsmanship, choreography, and physical reality. Because hidden beneath the surface of this stylish crime thriller is an argument that would quietly reshape Western action cinema. And by the time we're finished, you'll see why the transporter may have done more to preserve practical martial arts filmmaking in the West than almost any other action movie of its generation. If that opening sounds like a bold claim, It's because this video isn't interested in repeating the same nostalgic talking points that usually surround the transporter. This isn't simply a review, a recap, or a ranking of cool action scenes. It's an anatomical breakdown of a film that quietly rewrote the DNA of modern action cinema, without receiving the historical credit it deserves. We'll peel this movie apart layer by layer, examining not only what happens on screen, but why every creative decision still feels remarkably fresh more than 2 decades later. Beneath the polished suits, luxury cars, and explosive set pieces lies an incredibly deliberate design, one built with the precision of the man at its center. Our first major question asks how this film became such an unlikely cultural hybrid. On one side stands Luc Besson, bringing his unmistakable European sensibility. Stylish criminals, minimalist dialogue, sharply defined characters, and a fascination with professionalism. On the other stands Corey Yuen, one of Hong Kong cinema's greatest action architects, whose philosophy treats every fight as visual storytelling rather than simple violence. Separately, these creative voices were already influential. Together, they produced something that neither Hollywood nor either filmmaker could have created alone. Understanding where those traditions intersect is the key to understanding why The Transporter feels so different from almost every Western action film released during its era. From there, we'll examine perhaps the movie's greatest achievement, the creation of Jason Statham as a cinematic identity rather than merely an actor. Frank Martin isn't memorable because he delivers endless one-liners or emotional monologues. His presence is built from carefully assembled components: the perfectly tailored suits, the disciplined posture, the permanently controlled expression, the clipped, gravelly voice that rarely wastes a word. Even the smallest gestures contribute to a blueprint that countless action heroes would later imitate, but very few could genuinely replicate. We'll also dive deep into the filmmaking itself. We'll explore how Pierre Morel's cinematography captures movement with clarity instead of chaos, allowing every chase and every punch to remain readable without sacrificing intensity. We'll break down the soundtrack and its role in maintaining relentless momentum without overwhelming the action. Most importantly, we'll examine why the practical effects, real vehicles, tangible stunt work, and carefully choreographed combat continue to feel more convincing than many modern blockbusters built around enormous visual effects budgets and digital environments. By the end, this won't simply be the story of one successful action movie. It'll be the story of a cinematic formula that arrived at exactly the right moment, reshaped audience expectations, launched one of the defining action stars of the 21st century, and proved that style, discipline, and practical craftsmanship could still overpower spectacle. Before we dive deeper, think back to what watching action movies felt like in 2002. Maybe you discovered The Transporter during a late-night cable marathon, stumbling across it halfway through, and somehow staying awake until the credits rolled. Maybe you picked up the DVD from a crowded rental shelf, where the cover alone promised fast cars, sharp suits, and relentless action. Or maybe it became one of those films that always seemed to be playing on television, impossible to ignore whenever Frank Martin's black BMW appeared on the screen. However you found it, the experience felt different from today's endless stream of algorithm-driven recommendations. There was something unmistakably cool about that era. The French Riviera wasn't just a location. It became part of the fantasy. Sunlit coastal roads, narrow European streets, polished luxury sedans, expensive villas, and quiet harbors created an atmosphere that felt both glamorous and dangerous. You could almost smell the hot asphalt after a high-speed chase, hear the tires gripping the pavement, and feel every gear change echo through the cabin. The action wasn't buried beneath digital effects. It lived in real places with real momentum. Looking back now, it's easy to forget that The Transporter belonged to a category of filmmaking that has nearly disappeared. With a budget of roughly $21 million, it occupied the perfect middle ground. It wasn't a tiny independent experiment struggling for attention, and it wasn't a $200 million franchise carrying the weight of an entire cinematic universe. It had enough resources to deliver spectacular practical action, while remaining focused, efficient, and creatively disciplined. That kind of mid-budget action film once formed the backbone of the genre. Today it's becoming increasingly rare. Modern studios often force movies toward opposite extremes. Either they're massive franchise spectacles designed to launch sequels, spin-offs, and streaming series, or their intimate independent productions made with limited resources. The space where filmmakers could simply craft a stylish, self-contained action story has steadily shrunk, making films like The Transporter feel even more valuable in retrospect. And that's exactly why revisiting it now is so rewarding. If you haven't watched this film closely in years, there's a good chance you've remembered the car chases, the fight scenes, and Jason Statham's effortless charisma, but missed the extraordinary craftsmanship holding everything together. Watch how every movement occupies a clear space within the frame. Notice how every chase follows understandable geography instead of frantic cutting. Pay attention to how the editing creates rhythm rather than confusion, allowing speed and impact to coexist without sacrificing clarity. Once you begin seeing those details, The Transporter transforms from a nostalgic favorite into something far more significant. A masterclass in kinetic filmmaking and physical geometry that many modern blockbusters, despite their enormous budgets, have quietly forgotten. And that's only the beginning of what makes this film so enduring. To understand why The Transporter feels unlike almost any other Western action film of its era, you have to look far beyond its opening chase or its impeccably choreographed fights. The movie wasn't born inside the traditional Hollywood machine. It emerged from an ambitious experiment led by one of Europe's most influential filmmakers, a man who believed that France could build its own action empire without simply copying America. That man was Luc Besson. By the early 2000s, Besson had already established himself through visually distinctive films that balanced style with accessibility. But his ambitions extended well beyond directing. Through EuropaCorp, he envisioned something much larger. A production studio capable of creating internationally successful genre films while remaining firmly rooted in Europe. Instead of chasing art house prestige alone, Besson wanted commercially exciting movies that could travel across cultures and languages without losing their identity. It was a remarkably forward-thinking strategy. Hollywood already dominated the global blockbuster market, but Besson recognized an opportunity hiding in plain sight. Audiences everywhere understood universal cinematic languages. Fast cars, expertly staged action, memorable heroes, and simple but compelling premises. The trick wasn't to imitate Hollywood beat for beat. It was to combine those familiar ingredients with European locations, international casts, and filmmaking influences borrowed from entirely different traditions. That philosophy became the foundation of what many people now think of as the EuropaCorp formula. Take a high-concept idea that can be explained in a single sentence. Place it in visually striking European settings rarely explored by American studios. Keep the storytelling efficient, the pacing relentless, and the characters iconic rather than overly complicated. Then elevate everything with world-class stunt choreography, inspired by Hong Kong action cinema. The Transporter may be the purest expression of that formula. Its premise couldn't be simpler. A professional driver transports mysterious packages under 3 strict rules. He never changes the deal. He asks no names. He never opens the package. Within seconds, audiences understand exactly who Frank Martin is. That economy of storytelling reflects Besson's greatest strength. Rather than overwhelming viewers with complicated mythology or endless exposition, he builds intrigue through discipline. Every creative choice serves momentum. Of course, a concept this streamlined demanded exactly the right leading man. Jason Statham wasn't an obvious blockbuster star when production began. Before acting, he had spent years as a member of Britain's national diving squad, training at an elite athletic level that demanded extraordinary body control, precision, and discipline. Those qualities would later become invisible assets on screen. Unlike performers who merely looked athletic, Statham understood balance, timing, and physical commitment at a professional level. His acting career had also started unconventionally. Guy Ritchie cast him in Lock, Stock and Two Smoking Barrels and later Snatch, where Statham developed a reputation for understated charisma. He wasn't the loudest performer in those ensemble casts, nor was he trying to dominate every scene. Instead, audiences remembered his authenticity. He felt like someone who genuinely belonged in dangerous situations. Luc Besson saw something more. He recognized that Statham possessed the rare combination of athletic credibility, quiet confidence, and emotional restraint needed to create an entirely new kind of action hero. Frank Martin wouldn't rely on exaggerated muscles, comic book costumes, or endless catchphrases. His identity would be built through professionalism, efficiency, and complete physical control. Yet even the perfect actor couldn't accomplish that vision alone. The most important creative decision may have been hiring Corey Yuen. To Western audiences, Yuen wasn't yet a household name. But within Hong Kong cinema he was already regarded as one of the industry's great action innovators. Having worked alongside legends including Jackie Chan and Jet Li, he understood something many Western productions still struggled to grasp. Action isn't simply movement. It's storytelling through movement. Every kick reveals personality. Every dodge communicates intelligence. Every improvised weapon becomes part of the character's thought process. Hong Kong action cinema had spent decades refining this philosophy. Instead of hiding performers behind rapid editing, it celebrated clarity, rhythm, and physical performance. Props weren't background decoration. They became extensions of choreography. Everyday objects could transform into defensive tools, offensive weapons, or comedic opportunities, often within the same sequence. You can feel that influence throughout the transporter, especially during its most famous fights. Combat flows almost like dance, constantly adapting to changing environments. The action remains playful without sacrificing danger, inventive without becoming unrealistic. That balance is unmistakably Corey Yuen. Ironically, creating such seamless action required extraordinary coordination behind the scenes. The production itself resembled an international collaboration long before multinational filmmaking became commonplace. The crew was largely French. Jason Statham brought his distinctly British presence to the lead role. Screenwriter Robert Mark Kamen contributed an American storytelling perspective alongside Luc Besson's European instincts. Corey Yuen directed much of the action with a Hong Kong stunt team, whose methods differed significantly from Western productions. Language barriers were inevitable. Translators frequently bridged conversations between departments, ensuring choreography, camera placement, stunt timing, and performance notes survived the journey from one language to another. Creative discussions often moved through multiple interpreters before reaching their destination. Under less disciplined leadership, that process could have produced confusion or compromise. Instead, it produced synthesis. Each filmmaking tradition contributed something essential without overwhelming the others. French elegance shaped the atmosphere. British restraint defined the protagonist. American screenwriting supplied narrative efficiency. Hong Kong choreography injected kinetic brilliance. The result wasn't simply an international production. It became a cinematic fusion that felt entirely new. Looking back today, it's remarkable how naturally those influences coexist. Nothing about the transporter feels stitched together or artificially international. Every element supports the others, creating a film with a distinctive identity that belongs to no single country, yet reflects the strengths of them all. That unlikely collaboration would soon produce far more than a successful action movie. It would create one of the defining templates for 21st century action cinema, launching a franchise, transforming Jason Statham into a global star, and proving that the future of Western action might not lie in Hollywood alone, but in the spaces where different cinematic cultures collide. Timing can elevate a good movie into a cultural milestone, and The Transporter arrived at one of the most fascinating crossroads in modern action cinema. Released in October 2002, it entered an industry that was searching for its next identity. The bombastic heroes of the 1980s and 1990s had faded from dominance, yet the superhero era had not fully taken over. Hollywood stood between two generations of action filmmaking, experimenting with new formulas while audiences quietly grew tired of old tricks. To appreciate why The Transporter connected with viewers, you have to remember what the cinematic landscape actually looked like. 3 years earlier, The Matrix had revolutionized visual effects. Bullet time, gravity-defying martial arts, slow-motion acrobatics, and glossy black trench coats instantly became the defining aesthetic of blockbuster action. It wasn't simply a successful film. It became a template that countless studios desperately tried to imitate. Suddenly, everyone wanted impossible physics. Heroes floated across rooftops. Villains launched through walls without consequence. Every fight seemed determined to pause time long enough for audiences to admire another digitally enhanced spin kick. The visual language that had once felt groundbreaking rapidly became familiar, and familiarity slowly evolved into exhaustion. By 2002, the industry was experiencing what many viewers never consciously recognized: digital fatigue. The excitement surrounding computer-generated spectacle hadn't disappeared, but audiences were beginning to crave something that looked tangible again. They wanted collisions that felt painful, punches that carried genuine weight, chases where the vehicles actually occupied the road instead of existing primarily inside a computer. That desire became even stronger because of the wider cultural atmosphere surrounding the early 2000s. The years following September 11th reshaped popular entertainment in subtle but meaningful ways. While escapism remained important, many audiences also gravitated toward protagonists who felt grounded, disciplined, and exceptionally competent. Instead of flamboyant heroes relying on impossible technology or supernatural abilities, viewers increasingly admired individuals whose greatest strength was preparation, professionalism, and relentless determination. Frank Martin embodies exactly that shift. He doesn't possess extraordinary powers. He doesn't save the planet. He isn't chosen by destiny. He's simply astonishingly good at what he does because of training, discipline, and absolute commitment to his craft. In uncertain times, there was something reassuring about watching someone who always seemed completely in control, even when chaos erupted around him. Interestingly, the transporter wasn't alone in recognizing this changing appetite. Just 4 months earlier, The Bourne Identity introduced audiences to another radically different action hero. Jason Bourne wasn't invincible because of flashy gadgets or exaggerated bravado. His abilities came from intelligence, observation, improvisation, and brutally efficient combat. The film's grounded tone marked a dramatic departure from many action movies that had dominated the previous decade. Although Frank Martin and Jason Bourne occupy very different worlds, both represented the emergence of a new archetype. They weren't superheroes disguised as humans. They were highly trained professionals navigating dangerous situations with precision rather than spectacle. At nearly the same moment, another franchise was changing audience expectations in an entirely different direction. The Fast and the Furious, released in 2001, reignited mainstream enthusiasm for performance driving. Cars were no longer just transportation between action scenes. They became central characters. Engine sounds mattered. Gear changes mattered. Vehicle handling mattered. Driving itself became a performance. The transporter recognized that audiences had fallen in love with automotive precision, but it approached the idea from an entirely different perspective. Where the Fast and the Furious celebrated underground street racing, customized imports, and youthful rebellion, the transporter embraced elegance and discipline. Frank Martin's BMW wasn't modified to advertise personality. It reflected professionalism. Every maneuver served a practical purpose. Every drift existed because it was the fastest path through an obstacle, not because it looked impressive. Ironically, that restraint made the driving even cooler. The action felt authentic because the film never seemed desperate to prove how exciting it was. Confidence replaced excess. This combination of realistic combat and precision driving placed the transporter in a remarkably advantageous position. It borrowed the audience's growing appreciation for grounded action, while avoiding direct imitation of either the Bourne Identity or the Fast and the Furious. Instead, it occupied a unique middle ground where martial arts craftsmanship, European sophistication, and automotive expertise reinforced one another. Of course, convincing audiences to embrace an almost unknown leading man remained a significant challenge. Jason Statham simply wasn't a household name in 2002. He had memorable supporting roles, but asking viewers to accept him as the face of a major action film required a carefully calculated marketing strategy. The campaign wisely avoided selling personality before audiences had experienced it. Instead of relying on celebrity recognition, the advertising focused on visual identity. A sharply dressed man, a perfectly tailored black suit, dark sunglasses, a luxury sedan carving through impossibly narrow streets, lightning-fast martial arts exchanges, controlled explosions, clean compositions. The message was immediate. You may not know this actor, but you already understand this character. Even the tagline positioned Frank Martin as someone whose profession alone generated intrigue. He wasn't another generic secret agent or police officer. He was a courier operating under mysterious rules in an equally mysterious criminal world. That simple concept invited curiosity, while allowing the spectacular driving and fight choreography to speak for themselves. It was an unusually confident marketing approach. Rather than promising the biggest explosions or the most expensive visual effects, the trailers emphasized precision, speed, and style. They trusted audiences to recognize genuine craftsmanship when they saw it. Looking back today, that confidence seems almost prophetic. The film arrived precisely when viewers were beginning to rediscover the appeal of practical action, disciplined heroes, and believable physical performance. It didn't create those cultural shifts by itself, but it understood them better than many of its contemporaries. And once audiences finally met Frank Martin, they realized this wasn't merely another action protagonist chasing the latest trend. He was helping define the next one. One of the greatest strengths of the transporter reveals itself almost immediately, and it's something surprisingly rare in modern blockbuster filmmaking. The movie trusts its audience. Instead of opening with lengthy narration, dramatic flashbacks, or an avalanche of exposition explaining who Frank Martin is, it lets his actions speak first. Within the opening 15 minutes, we understand his profession, his discipline, his intelligence, and even his personal philosophy without the film ever stopping to lecture us. That economy of storytelling is remarkable. The opening bank robbery escape functions as far more than an exciting action sequence. It is the film's mission statement. Every decision Frank makes during those first few minutes quietly establishes the rules that govern not only his career but the entire narrative. When the masked robbers climb into the BMW after their heist, everything appears to be proceeding exactly as planned. The timing is precise. The route is predetermined. Frank waits calmly behind the wheel, seemingly detached from the panic surrounding him. Then he notices something. There are 4 passengers instead of 3. For almost any other getaway driver, this would be a minor inconvenience. More people simply means another body squeezed into the back seat. But Frank doesn't even start the engine. He refuses. Not because he's frightened. Not because the police are closing in. Not because the odds have suddenly become impossible. He refuses because the agreement has changed. It's changed the deal. That single moment tells us everything we need to know. Frank isn't merely transporting criminals. He's protecting a system. His rules aren't flexible guidelines. They're the foundation of his professional identity. Every calculation, the vehicle's weight, fuel consumption, escape route, timing, and risk assessment, depends upon absolute consistency. Add one unexpected variable, and the carefully engineered plan no longer exists. It's an extraordinary piece of character writing, because the audience instantly understands that Frank values principle above convenience. He would rather abandon a lucrative job than compromise the standards that define him. Eventually, one robber leaves the vehicle, restoring the original agreement. Only then does Frank engage first gear. Notice how the film doesn't celebrate this decision with dramatic speeches or triumphant music. It simply moves forward, allowing the audience to appreciate the quiet confidence of a man whose discipline never wavers under pressure. Then the chase begins. Even today, it remains one of the most satisfying opening pursuits in modern action cinema, because of its commitment to mechanical storytelling. Frank isn't driving a futuristic supercar loaded with impossible gadgets. His weapon is a BMW 7 Series equipped with a manual transmission, and the film constantly reminds us that every successful escape depends on his skill, rather than technological miracles. Watch how the sequence emphasizes process. Hands moving confidently across the gear lever. Perfectly timed heel and toe downshifts. Measured steering corrections. Controlled braking before each corner. Every maneuver feels earned because the audience witnesses the decisions behind it. The driving becomes a performance built on technique instead of chaos. Equally important is the choice of opponents. The French police pursue Frank in smaller, lighter hatchbacks that should theoretically enjoy advantages on narrow urban streets. Rather than pretending the BMW possesses magical abilities, the film demonstrates how superior planning and extraordinary driving can overcome those disadvantages. Frank isn't faster simply because the script demands it. He's faster because he understands momentum, weight transfer, traction, and timing better than anyone chasing him. The chase unfolds almost like choreography. Every turn has purpose. Every obstacle creates a problem that demands an intelligent solution. Instead of overwhelming viewers with frantic editing, the camera consistently preserves geographical clarity. We know where Frank is, where the police are, and why each maneuver succeeds. That spatial awareness transforms the pursuit into something closer to automotive ballet than conventional action spectacle. The car doesn't merely move through space. It communicates character. Frank's driving style mirrors his personality. Efficient, elegant, disciplined, and completely free from unnecessary flourish. Even his most spectacular drifts emerge from practical necessity rather than ego. Once the delivery is complete, the film performs another subtle but essential shift. Instead of immediately launching into another mission, it follows Frank home. This transition is crucial because it reveals the extraordinary contrast at the heart of his existence. His villa in southern France feels almost monastic. Everything has a designated place. The furniture is minimalist. The rooms remain spotless. There is no clutter, no excess, no visible sign of emotional attachment. Every object appears arranged with military precision. Frank cooks with care, exercises methodically, maintains his home meticulously, and follows routines that resemble disciplined rituals more than ordinary daily habits. Even the way he folds clothing or prepares a meal reinforces the impression that control governs every aspect of his life. The violence belongs outside these walls. Inside there is only order. This domestic sanctuary serves an important narrative purpose. It isn't simply a luxurious house designed to make the protagonist look successful. It represents the psychological balance Frank desperately protects. His criminal profession constantly exposes him to danger, betrayal, and unpredictability. Home becomes the opposite, a carefully constructed environment where every variable remains under his control. It's also deeply revealing that the film never portrays him as lonely in an obvious sense. He doesn't complain about isolation. He doesn't seek sympathy. Solitude appears to be another deliberate choice, another extension of the same discipline that governs his professional code. By the end of these opening 15 minutes, the transporter has accomplished something many action films struggle to achieve in 2 hours. Without lengthy exposition, we understand who Frank Martin is, how he thinks, what he values, and why his rigid code matters. More importantly, we understand exactly what kind of story this is. Because once a character this devoted to order finally breaks one of his own rules, the consequences won't simply change the mission. They'll dismantle the entire life he's built with such meticulous precision. After establishing Frank Martin as a man whose entire identity revolves around discipline, the transporter introduces the one assignment capable of dismantling that carefully constructed world. On the surface, nothing appears unusual. It's another delivery, another anonymous client, another package that isn't his concern. The job arrives through familiar channels, the payment is agreed upon, and the destination is clear. For Frank, this should be another flawless transaction completed without questions, conversation, or emotional involvement. The client identifies himself only as Wall Street. Even the nickname perfectly fits Frank's professional ecosystem. Names create attachments. Attachments create complications. By using aliases instead of identities, everyone becomes interchangeable. Clients aren't people with histories or motives. They're simply contracts waiting to be fulfilled. For someone living by rigid rules, that emotional distance is essential. Frank loads the package into the trunk, starts the BMW, and begins another seemingly routine journey across southern France. The early stages of the drive feel almost comforting because they're so familiar. Every movement reflects the same precision we've already seen. The engine hums steadily, the roads stretch across beautiful landscapes, and Frank remains completely focused on the task ahead. Then fate intervenes in the most ordinary way imaginable. A flat tire. In many action movies, life-changing events arrive through explosions, ambushes, or elaborate betrayals. The transporter chooses something refreshingly mundane instead. There are no gunshots, no dramatic chase, just a punctured tire forcing Frank to stop and perform a simple repair. That ordinary inconvenience changes everything. As he opens the trunk to retrieve the spare wheel, something immediately feels wrong. The package moves. At first it's subtle, almost easy to dismiss. Then it moves again. Frank pauses. For perhaps the first time in the film, uncertainty interrupts his otherwise mechanical confidence. Packages aren't supposed to breathe. They're not supposed to shift beneath the canvas. They're certainly not supposed to force him into making a decision his entire career has been designed to avoid. Standing beside the open trunk, Frank faces the most important moral crossroads of his life. Rule 3 has always been absolute. Never open the package. That rule exists for a reason. Curiosity creates responsibility. Responsibility creates consequences. The less Frank knows, the safer everyone remains, including himself. Yet the situation before him is fundamentally different. This isn't stolen artwork. It isn't illegal weapons. It isn't anonymous cargo. It's alive. The distinction matters because the rule suddenly collides with something deeper than professionalism. Humanity. For several tense moments, the film allows silence to carry the emotional weight. Frank isn't wrestling with fear. He's wrestling with principle. If he ignores the movement inside the bag, he preserves the code that has protected him for years. If he investigates, he destroys the boundary separating business from conscience. Eventually, conscience wins. Frank unzips the bag. Inside is a young woman. Lai emerges frightened, exhausted, and physically restrained. It's an image that instantly transforms the audience's understanding of the assignment. What appeared to be another smuggling operation now reveals itself as something far darker and far more personal. Yet notice what Frank doesn't do. He doesn't suddenly become a conventional hero. He doesn't dramatically free her, promise protection, or declare war against the criminals responsible. Instead, his response remains remarkably restrained. Lai asks for water. After a brief hesitation, Frank gives it to her. It's an incredibly small gesture, yet emotionally enormous. That bottle of water becomes the first visible crack in the emotional armor we've watched him construct since the opening scene. He acknowledges another person's suffering without fully abandoning his professional obligations. Just as importantly, he keeps her restrained. This detail is crucial because it preserves the complexity of his character. Frank isn't experiencing a complete moral transformation. He's still committed to completing the contract. He's still trying to convince himself that compassion and professionalism can somehow coexist. The sequence beautifully captures the contradiction defining Frank Martin. He's a criminal. He knowingly transports dangerous cargo for dangerous people. He profits from illegal activity. But he also possesses ethical boundaries that exist independently of the law. He doesn't measure right and wrong according to legal codes. Instead, he follows an intensely personal moral system built around fairness, consistency, and discipline. Giving Lai water isn't simply kindness. It's proof that those boundaries exist. For the first time, Frank's rules begin competing with one another. Professional duty tells him to finish the job. Basic decency tells him another human being deserves compassion. The conflict remains unresolved because Frank still believes he can separate the two. He closes the trunk, continues the journey, and arrives at the delivery point. The meeting with Wall Street unfolds with chilling efficiency. The client displays none of Frank's discipline or restraint. Instead, he radiates casual arrogance, treating the entire exchange as another profitable business transaction. The contrast between the two men couldn't be clearer. Both operate outside the law. Only one believes rules have meaning. Frank completes the delivery exactly as agreed. From his perspective, the assignment should now be over. Payment is exchanged. The package has reached its destination. His responsibility should end the moment he drives away. But something fundamental has already changed. Frank may have physically delivered the package, yet he can no longer claim ignorance. He knows there was a frightened woman inside that bag. He knows she wasn't willing cargo. Most importantly, he knows he chose to look. That decision cannot be reversed. The brilliance of this section lies in how quietly the film dismantles its protagonist's emotional defenses. No explosive speech announces his transformation. No dramatic montage declares that he's becoming a different man. Instead, a series of tiny choices, a flat tire, a moving bag, a bottle of water, a brief conversation, slowly erode the certainty that once defined him. By the time Frank drives away from Wall Street's estate, he still believes he's leaving the job behind. In reality, the job has followed him. His professional code was designed to keep emotion outside the vehicle, safely locked away with the cargo. The moment he opened that bag, however, he invited humanity into a life built entirely on detachment. And once that door opens, there is no closing it again. If the first act is about a man trying to preserve his carefully constructed code, the second begins the moment that code is shattered beyond repair. Up to this point, Frank Martin still believes that professionalism can shield him from consequences. He completed the delivery. He honored the agreement. He did his job. In his mind, the incident with Lai was an uncomfortable exception, not the beginning of a war. Then someone decides to erase the only witness they can't control. The attack arrives with brutal efficiency. Hidden inside what appears to be another routine package is an explosive powerful enough to destroy everything Frank has spent years building. The moment he realizes something is wrong, instinct takes over. He reacts with the same split-second precision that defines every aspect of his life, diving away just before the explosion consumes his beloved BMW. The blast is spectacular, but its real impact is emotional rather than visual. This isn't just the destruction of an expensive luxury car. It's the destruction of Frank's identity. Throughout the film's opening, the BMW has functioned as an extension of its driver. Every immaculate panel, every perfectly maintained mechanical component, every precisely executed gear change reflected Frank's personality. The car wasn't a status symbol. It was a physical representation of order, discipline, and control. It was a machine maintained with the same obsessive care that Frank applied to his own life. Watching it erupt into flames feels strangely personal. The villains make a mistake they never fully understand. They think they're eliminating a professional courier. Instead, they violated the one thing Frank truly respects. Until this moment, Frank has been reacting to circumstances. He's honored contracts, adapted to unexpected complications, and tried to remain detached. The bombing changes the direction of the story completely. Survival is no longer enough. Questions demand answers. Who planted the bomb? Why was he marked for death after successfully completing the assignment? And most importantly, what exactly has Wall Street dragged him into? For perhaps the first time, Frank abandons passive professionalism and embraces initiative. Rather than disappearing into the night or contacting another criminal associate, he returns directly to the source of the betrayal. Wall Street's compound. The decision itself tells us how dramatically Frank has evolved. Earlier in the film, he avoided unnecessary confrontation because conflict represented bad business. Now he willingly walks into the lion's den because restoring order requires understanding who destroyed it. The infiltration sequence beautifully demonstrates another defining quality of Frank Martin. He isn't reckless. He isn't driven by blind revenge. He approaches the estate exactly as he approached every delivery, with preparation, observation, and patience. Before violence begins, Frank studies the environment. He evaluates entrances, guard positions, escape routes, and timing. Every movement resembles a military operation rather than an emotional outburst. The film reinforces that his greatest weapon has never been brute strength. It's discipline under pressure. When the action finally erupts, Corey Yuen's Hong Kong influence becomes impossible to miss. Frank moves through the compound with astonishing efficiency, silently eliminating guards before they fully understand what's happening. Every takedown is clean, direct, and purposeful. There are no unnecessary flourishes or exaggerated displays of dominance. One opponent falls, then another, each encounter flowing naturally into the next. Notice how the choreography constantly rewards intelligence over force. Frank uses shadows for concealment. Walls become protection. Furniture becomes distraction. The environment itself transforms into part of the combat. Instead of presenting violence as chaotic destruction, the sequence treats every encounter like another logistical problem waiting to be solved. Each opponent represents an obstacle rather than an opportunity for spectacle. That distinction keeps Frank remarkably believable. He's extraordinarily capable, but never supernatural. Eventually, his search leads him back to Lai. By now, she understands that Frank isn't simply another employee working for Wall Street. He's someone caught inside the same nightmare, even if their reasons for fighting remain different. Trust doesn't appear instantly between them, but necessity creates an uneasy alliance. The escape that follows perfectly captures the film's evolving dynamics. Frank no longer has his carefully maintained BMW. His most trusted companion is gone. Instead, he commandeers one of Wall Street's own luxury vehicles. The symbolism is subtle but effective. Earlier, Frank controlled every variable because he relied upon equipment he knew intimately. Now he's driving unfamiliar machinery under impossible circumstances, forced to improvise in ways his orderly life never demanded before. Lai is inside the vehicle as they flee. At that moment, the story undergoes another crucial transformation. She is no longer cargo. She becomes a passenger. That difference changes everything. Packages remain emotionally distant. Passengers create relationships. Whether Frank admits it or not, protecting Lai has quietly become part of his mission. Of course, escaping the compound solves almost nothing. In fact, it makes every situation considerably worse. Wall Street now sees Frank as a traitor who possesses dangerous knowledge. His former employer wants him eliminated before he can interfere further. Meanwhile, the French police begin connecting him to an escalating series of violent incidents. To law enforcement, Frank doesn't appear to be uncovering a criminal conspiracy. He looks like an exceptionally dangerous man leaving destruction wherever he goes. The walls begin closing from every direction. Professional criminals are hunting him. Authorities are searching for him. His home has already been compromised. His trusted vehicle has been destroyed. His carefully organized existence has collapsed within a matter of hours. Yet something unexpected happens as his external world falls apart. Internally, Frank becomes calmer. Freed from the illusion that his old rules can still protect him, he stops trying to preserve the life he once had. The professional courier disappears, replaced by someone far more dangerous. A man fighting not for payment or reputation, but for truth. It's a subtle transformation, but an irreversible one. The irony is almost poetic. Wall Street believed that destroying a car would eliminate a problem. Instead, he destroyed the only thing still convincing Frank Martin to stay neutral. And once neutrality dies, the most disciplined man in the room becomes the most relentless opponent imaginable. Every great action film reaches a moment where survival is no longer the central objective. The protagonist can no longer return to the life they once knew, and the conflict expands into something far larger than personal self-preservation. For the transporter, that transformation arrives with overwhelming force as Frank Martin loses the last physical symbol of the orderly existence he spent years constructing. Until now, Frank has still possessed one comforting illusion. Even after the destruction of his BMW, there remained the possibility that he could somehow reclaim normality. His villa still stood overlooking the peaceful French coastline, waiting as the sanctuary where discipline, routine, and silence replaced violence. It represented stability in a profession built on constant danger. The villains understand exactly what that place means. So they don't merely attack it, they erase it. The assault begins with terrifying efficiency. Heavy weapons tear through the tranquil property, transforming one of the film's calmest locations into a battlefield within seconds. Walls collapse under explosive force. Windows disintegrate into clouds of glass. Carefully arranged rooms vanish beneath fire and debris. The quiet refuge that once reflected Frank's disciplined personality is systematically reduced to rubble. Visually, the sequence is devastating because of the contrast established earlier in the film. This wasn't simply an expensive house. It was Frank's sanctuary. Every room reflected precision. Every object had purpose. Every detail communicated order. Watching rockets obliterate that carefully maintained environment feels like witnessing someone destroy years of emotional discipline in only a few moments. The attack isn't just physical intimidation, it's psychological warfare. The message from Wall Street couldn't be clearer. There is nowhere left for you to return. From a storytelling perspective, this is the point of no return. Heroes often undergo symbolic deaths before they can become something greater, and Frank experiences exactly that. The courier who believed rules could protect him has now lost his car, his home, his anonymity, and almost every trace of the controlled life that once defined him. Ironically, losing everything creates the first genuine opportunity for truth. With no sanctuary left to defend and no professional distance left to preserve, Frank finally listens. Not to another client, not to another criminal, but to Lai. Up until this point, she has largely existed as the mysterious package that shattered his code. Now she finally becomes something much more important. The emotional and moral center of the story. Her revelation fundamentally changes everything the audience thinks they understand. The smuggling operation isn't about stolen merchandise or ordinary organized crime. It's about people. Lai explains that her father is involved in transporting containers filled with undocumented Chinese immigrants, Individuals promised opportunity, but instead treat it as disposable cargo. Wall Street's criminal network profits from desperation, reducing human lives to another commodity moving across international borders. Suddenly, the title The Transporter acquires an entirely different meaning. Frank believed he transported anonymous packages while refusing to ask questions. Now he realizes that somewhere along the way, the definition of cargo became horrifyingly literal. This revelation expands the film's moral landscape almost instantly. Until now, Frank's objective has been survival. Escape the assassins. Understand the betrayal. Stay alive long enough to restore balance. Those goals are no longer enough. There are innocent people trapped inside shipping containers. Families whose futures have been sold as products. Victims who cannot simply fight their own way to freedom. Frank isn't merely confronting criminals anymore. He's confronting an industry built on exploitation. What makes this transition particularly effective is how naturally it grows from the protagonist's established character. Frank doesn't suddenly become a different person. He doesn't transform into an idealistic crusader overnight. Instead, the same principles that once made him an exceptional courier now push him toward heroism. His entire life has been governed by fairness, by honoring agreements, by rejecting unnecessary cruelty. Wall Street violates every one of those values. The criminal isn't simply breaking laws. He's breaking the code Frank has quietly followed all along. That distinction matters because it keeps Frank's transformation believable. He's not abandoning his identity. He's finally applying it to something worthy. As the conspiracy becomes clearer, another fascinating figure continues moving through the edges of the narrative. Inspector Tarconi. In many action movies, the police exist primarily as obstacles, slow-moving authorities chasing the wrong suspect while the real villain escapes. Tarconi serves a far more interesting purpose. From his very first appearance, he recognizes that Frank doesn't fit the profile of an ordinary criminal. The evidence points toward guilt, yet the man himself inspires curiosity rather than certainty. Tarconi observes more than he speaks, constantly weighing instinct against procedure. His relationship with Frank gradually develops into one of the film's most understated pleasures. Instead of engaging in endless cat-and-mouse confrontations, Tarconi becomes a thoughtful counterbalance to the protagonist. He's intelligent enough to notice inconsistencies, experienced enough to question appearances, and compassionate enough to recognize that justice isn't always identical to legal procedure. Their conversations carry an almost playful tension. Both men understand more than they openly admit. Both recognize that the other is operating according to a personal code. Neither fully trusts the other, yet neither sees the other as a true enemy. That complexity elevates Tarconi beyond the standard detective archetype. He isn't chasing Frank out of personal obsession or professional pride. He's searching for the truth, even when that truth refuses to fit neatly within official reports. As a result, Frank now finds himself surrounded by entirely different pressures than those that launched the story. The professional courier is gone. In his place stands a man with no home, no anonymity, no reliable escape route, and no remaining illusion that neutrality is possible. What he does possess, however, is something far more dangerous than any luxury car or carefully memorized route. He finally understands what he's fighting for. And once a man as disciplined as Frank Martin replaces professional obligation with personal conviction, stopping him becomes infinitely more difficult than betraying him ever was. By the time The Transporter reaches its final act, the story has expanded far beyond the boundaries of a simple delivery gone wrong. The opening promised a tightly controlled thriller about a courier who never broke his own rules. Now, every one of those rules has been shattered, and the only path forward is direct confrontation. Frank Martin is no longer trying to escape the consequences of curiosity. He has accepted that the only way to restore any sense of justice is to dismantle the operation at its source. The destination is the harbor. It's an ideal setting because it represents the industrial heart of the trafficking network. Endless rows of shipping containers stretch toward the horizon, transforming ordinary cargo infrastructure into a maze of hidden lives. Earlier in the film, containers symbolized commerce and logistics. Now they represent imprisonment. The visual metaphor is impossible to ignore. Human beings have been reduced to freight, stacked and transported with the same cold efficiency as manufactured goods. Frank's assault begins with one of the film's boldest practical stunts. Rather than approaching from the ground or launching another predictable vehicle chase, he chooses an aerial assault that immediately raises the stakes. Suspended beneath a parachute, he descends toward a moving transport convoy, timing every movement with extraordinary precision. There is no room for hesitation. The trucks continue racing forward while the distance between Frank and his landing point disappears second by second. The moment he touches down on the roof of the moving vehicle remains exhilarating because it feels astonishingly tangible. The wind, the speed, the instability beneath his feet. Everything communicates genuine physical danger. Modern audiences have become accustomed to digitally enhanced spectacles where impossible feats often feel detached from reality. Here, the stunt succeeds because the film constantly reminds us that a single mistake would be catastrophic. That commitment to practical execution reinforces the central philosophy we've been tracing throughout this essay. The transporter doesn't ask viewers to admire impossible physics. It asks them to appreciate exceptional skill operating within believable limits. From above, the convoy becomes a battlefield. Frank moves across the tops of speeding trucks with the same discipline that defined his opening getaway drive. Every leap is calculated. Every landing is controlled. Even in the middle of chaos, he never appears reckless. His confidence comes from preparation rather than arrogance, and that distinction keeps the sequence grounded despite its extraordinary scale. Eventually, the confrontation shifts into the trucks themselves, producing one of the film's most effective changes in rhythm. The expansive freedom of the highway suddenly collapses into narrow corridors, cramped driver compartments, and confined cargo spaces. The choreography adapts instantly. Large sweeping movements disappear, replaced by short, explosive strikes delivered wherever space permits. Every punch, elbow, and kick must account for the limitations of the environment. Corey Yuen's influence shines brilliantly here. Instead of treating the truck as a generic location for another fight, the vehicle becomes an active participant in the choreography. Doors slam unexpectedly. Steering wheels interfere with attacks. Seats become obstacles. Momentum constantly threatens to throw combatants off balance. The action evolves naturally from the setting rather than ignoring it. Perhaps most impressively, the film never loses spatial clarity. Even as multiple vehicles race down the highway, we understand where every character is positioned and why each movement matters. The geography remains coherent, allowing tension to build through anticipation instead of confusion. Every transition from rooftop to cab, from one truck to another, feels logically connected. Meanwhile, the emotional conflict reaches its own breaking point. Lai has spent the film caught between two worlds. She carries the burden of knowing that one of the architects of this horrific trafficking operation is her own father. Blood ties collide with moral responsibility in a way that no physical fight can resolve. Eventually, the story forces her to make the decision she has tried desperately to avoid. When Frank's life hangs in the balance, Lai realizes there is no longer any middle ground between family loyalty and basic humanity. Saving Frank means confronting the man who helped create this nightmare. In one heartbreaking moment, she chooses to stop her own father, sacrificing the last remaining connection to the life she once knew. It's a deeply tragic resolution because there are no real winners. The traffickers are defeated. The operation collapses. The innocent people trapped inside the containers are finally freed. Justice, in the broadest sense, prevails. Yet the victory demands an enormous personal cost. Lai loses her father, not only physically but emotionally, accepting that the person she hoped might still possess some trace of redemption had already surrendered himself to greed and cruelty long before the story began. Frank experiences a different kind of loss. Standing beside the highway after the violence has ended, he isn't celebrating. There is no triumphant speech. No exaggerated declaration that everything has returned to normal. Instead, the film embraces an unexpectedly quiet conclusion. The rescued immigrants are alive. The immediate danger has passed. But Frank's old life no longer exists. The immaculate BMW that once symbolized absolute control has been reduced to ashes. The peaceful villa overlooking the Mediterranean has been destroyed. His anonymity has vanished. His carefully maintained rules have proven incapable of protecting either himself or the innocent people whose lives intersected with his profession. Perhaps most importantly, Frank himself has changed. He began this journey believing that professionalism required emotional distance. Never ask questions. Never become involved. Never allow compassion to interfere with efficiency. Ironically, breaking those rules is exactly what transforms him into a genuine hero. The film's closing moments refuse to restore the comforting illusion that everything can simply be reset. Frank doesn't reclaim the pristine existence we saw at the beginning because that version of himself could only exist while ignoring the human consequences of his work. Instead, he walks away carrying something far more valuable than the orderly life he lost: perspective. He now understands that rules are meaningful only when they serve humanity rather than replace it. Discipline remains one of his defining strengths, but it has evolved from blind obedience into conscious responsibility. It's an unusually reflective ending for an action film, and that's precisely why it lingers. The final image isn't about victory through destruction. It's about the quiet cost of choosing conscience over convenience. Frank Martin saved the cargo. In doing so, he sacrificed the carefully controlled world that once allowed him to believe every delivery ended when the engine stopped. Now he knows better. Some packages change the transporter forever. Frank Martin is one of those rare action protagonists who becomes fascinating not because the film explains everything about him, but because it deliberately leaves so much unsaid. We learn only fragments of his history. He's an ex-Special Forces operative. He possesses military discipline, extraordinary driving ability, and combat skills far beyond those of an ordinary criminal courier. Beyond that, the movie refuses to provide lengthy monologues about his past or emotionally charged flashbacks designed to manufacture sympathy. Instead, the transporter trusts the audience to read his behavior. Ironically, the less Frank says about himself, the more we understand him. The defining feature of his personality isn't his ability to fight, drive, or survive impossible situations. It's his obsession with rules. At first glance, those three famous rules appear to be simple professional guidelines. Never change the deal. No names. Never open the package. They sound practical, even logical, for someone operating within the criminal underworld. They minimize unnecessary risk and maintain emotional distance from dangerous clients. But look closer, and they reveal something much deeper. These aren't merely business practices. They're coping mechanisms. Everything about Frank suggests someone who has spent years learning how to compartmentalize violence. Military training doesn't simply teach combat. It teaches structure, repetition, discipline, and emotional control under extraordinary pressure. Those habits become survival tools, allowing soldiers to function in situations where hesitation can mean death. When military life ends, however, that psychological framework doesn't simply disappear. Many veterans carry elements of it into civilian life because routine creates stability. Predictability reduces anxiety. Rules establish boundaries between dangerous experiences and ordinary existence. Frank appears to have built his entire post-military identity around exactly that principle. His deliveries follow strict procedures. His conversations remain brief. His emotions stay carefully contained. Even his home reflects military precision. Nothing exists without purpose. Nothing remains out of place. Every part of his daily routine reinforces the illusion that life can be controlled if every variable is managed correctly. That illusion is incredibly comforting. It's also incredibly fragile. The brilliance of the transporter lies in demonstrating that Frank's greatest strength is simultaneously his greatest weakness. His rigid adherence to order allows him to outperform everyone around him. He anticipates problems, prepares for contingencies, and rarely acts impulsively. Yet the moment reality refuses to obey his carefully designed system, he struggles. Lie doesn't fit inside his rules. Human trafficking doesn't fit inside his rules. Betrayal doesn't fit inside his rules. The world gradually forces Frank to confront something deeply uncomfortable. Life cannot always be reduced to procedures. Sometimes morality demands flexibility. That's why opening the package becomes such a powerful turning point. It's not simply the violation of Rule 3. It's the collapse of the psychological wall Frank has spent years constructing between himself and the consequences of his profession. Once he allows compassion to enter the equation, compartmentalization becomes impossible. The courier and the human being can no longer remain separate. That internal conflict is reflected visually throughout the film, especially in Frank's wardrobe. Action heroes have often been defined by iconic costumes, but Frank's clothing serves an unusually sophisticated narrative purpose. The crisp black suit, the perfectly pressed white shirt, the immaculate tie. Every detail communicates precision. Unlike tactical uniforms covered in weapons or exaggerated leather outfits designed to project intimidation, Frank dresses almost like a businessman attending an executive meeting. The elegance immediately distinguishes him from the criminals surrounding him. But the suit represents more than style. It functions as armor. Traditional armor protects the body. Frank's suit protects identity. It creates a clean, controlled exterior that resists contamination from the dirty, chaotic world in which he works. No matter how violent the mission becomes, he begins each assignment perfectly composed, as though discipline itself has become visible through clothing. Notice how often the film emphasizes maintaining that appearance. After fights, Frank adjusts his cuffs. He straightens his tie. He smooths wrinkles from his jacket whenever possible. These aren't moments of vanity. They're rituals of psychological restoration. Every adjustment quietly reasserts control after chaos threatens to overwhelm it. The contrast becomes especially meaningful during the oil-covered garage fight. By coating himself in grease, Frank temporarily sacrifices the immaculate image that has defined him from the beginning. His elegant suit disappears beneath grime, visually representing the collapse of the ordered identity he has tried so hard to preserve. Ironically, embracing disorder allows him to survive. Perhaps no element of Frank Martin's characterization is more important than Jason Statham's performance itself. Before this film, action heroes often relied upon oversized personalities. The genre celebrated loud one-liners, exaggerated confidence, and theatrical displays of masculinity. Even when those characters remained entertaining, they frequently announced their toughness through constant dialogue. Frank takes the opposite approach. He speaks very little. When he does speak, every sentence feels intentional. Silence becomes one of his defining characteristics. Statham understands that confidence rarely needs explanation. His posture communicates authority before dialogue ever begins. Small glances replace lengthy speeches. Tiny shifts in body language reveal emotional changes that another performer might express through dramatic monologues. Watch how Frank enters a room. He immediately assesses exits, measures distances, studies everyone present. Those observations happen almost invisibly, yet they tell us exactly how his mind operates. His physical performance extends naturally into the fight choreography as well. Frank never appears angry while fighting. He doesn't scream. He doesn't taunt opponents. Combat is treated like another professional task requiring concentration, rather than emotional release. That restraint makes every movement more believable. It also separates him from many of the action icons who came before him. Frank Martin isn't trying to entertain his enemies with witty remarks between punches. He's trying to end dangerous situations as efficiently as possible. In many ways, Jason Statham's entire career is built upon the foundation established here. The restrained charisma, disciplined movement, understated humor, and unwavering professionalism that audiences now instantly associate with him all emerge fully formed in the transporter. More importantly, they redefine what an action hero could look like in the 21st century. Frank Martin proves that quiet confidence can be more intimidating than loud bravado, that discipline can be more compelling than raw aggression, and that the strongest heroes are often the ones fighting hardest to keep themselves under control. Because beneath the perfectly tailored suit and unwavering composure isn't a man without emotion. It's a man who has spent years trying to convince himself that emotion can be contained. The entire film exists to prove that it can't. Every memorable hero needs more than an opponent who can throw harder punches or command a larger army. The greatest antagonists challenge the protagonist's worldview, exposing flaws that physical strength alone cannot overcome. The transporter understands this remarkably well. Its villains aren't simply obstacles standing between Frank Martin and the film's explosive finale. They function as distorted reflections of the philosophy Frank has lived by for years, forcing him to confront an uncomfortable truth about himself. The most obvious threat is the man known only as Wall Street. Even his chosen alias reveals everything we need to know. Frank's nickname reflects anonymity. It protects identity while maintaining professional distance. Wall Street's nickname serves a different purpose. It symbolizes a system where profit becomes the highest moral authority, where every decision can be justified if the numbers work in your favor. The name isn't subtle, but it doesn't need to be. The character exists as the embodiment of business stripped of conscience. At first glance, Wall Street appears completely different from Frank. He's loud where Frank is quiet, arrogant where Frank is disciplined, impulsive where Frank is methodical. He surrounds himself with armed henchmen, expensive estates, and displays of power designed to intimidate everyone around him. Every scene emphasizes excess. His confidence comes from wealth and influence rather than personal capability. Frank needs no audience. Wall Street always seems to perform. Yet beneath those obvious differences lies a disturbing similarity. Both men approach the world through transactions. Both believe agreements matter. Both operate according to professional rules rather than emotional impulses. The crucial distinction lies in where those rules end. Frank refuses to ask questions because he believes ignorance protects everyone involved. His code creates emotional distance from the consequences of his work. If he never learns what he's transporting, he never has to judge whether the assignment is morally acceptable. Business remains business. Wall Street follows that same logic to its horrifying conclusion. Human trafficking? Just business. Exploiting desperate families? Another deal. Murdering anyone who becomes inconvenient? A necessary business expense. To Wall Street, morality has no place inside commerce. Profit determines value. Everything else becomes irrelevant. That realization becomes one of the film's most powerful philosophical turning points. Frank gradually understands that his own professional detachment has unintentionally created space for people like Wall Street to thrive. By refusing to ask questions, he isn't directly participating in human trafficking, but he is helping build the logistical system that allows it to exist. This doesn't make Frank morally identical to Wall Street. The film is careful never to suggest that. Instead, it presents something far more interesting. Their philosophies occupy neighboring territory. Frank draws ethical boundaries that eventually stop him from crossing certain lines. Wall Street simply removes those boundaries altogether. In other words, Wall Street represents what Frank could become if professionalism completely replaced humanity. That's why the betrayal hurts so deeply. Wall Street doesn't merely attempt to kill Frank. He exposes the dangerous limitations of Frank's entire worldview. The contrast between the two men extends beyond philosophy into every aspect of their presentation. Watch how they move. Frank conserves energy. Every gesture serves a purpose. He rarely raises his voice because authority doesn't require volume. Wall Street constantly seeks attention. He talks loudly, threatens dramatically, and relies upon intimidation as a substitute for genuine competence. His confidence exists only while surrounded by bodyguards, expensive property, and overwhelming numerical advantage. Frank enters dangerous situations alone. Wall Street rarely faces anyone without an army standing nearby. Even their approaches to violence reveal opposite personalities. Frank fights only when absolutely necessary, ending confrontations as efficiently as possible. There is no pleasure in his brutality. Violence is simply another professional skill. Wall Street enjoys demonstrating power. Cruelty becomes performance. He wants victims to understand who controls the situation. That difference quietly reinforces the film's larger themes about discipline versus domination. Frank possesses extraordinary capability but rarely advertises it. Wall Street advertises strength constantly because genuine confidence is missing beneath the surface. If Wall Street represents capitalism without conscience, then Mr. Kwai embodies another disturbing corruption entirely. At first, Lai's father seems almost secondary compared to the louder American criminal directing much of the operation. As the story unfolds, however, he becomes arguably the film's darkest character, because his betrayal isn't merely professional. It's personal. Parents traditionally symbolize protection. Across cultures, fathers are expected to shelter their children from danger, sacrificing their own comfort if necessary to ensure the next generation survives. Mr. Kwai inverts that expectation completely. Rather than protecting vulnerable people, He profits from their desperation. Rather than safeguarding his daughter, he repeatedly places her life at risk whenever business demands it. The human trafficking operation itself already reveals extraordinary moral collapse, but the treatment of Lai transforms greed into something even more unsettling. She isn't simply another victim caught inside the criminal enterprise. She's family, yet family never outweighs profit. That emotional emptiness distinguishes Mr. Kwai from many conventional crime bosses. He isn't driven by rage, revenge, or wounded pride. His decisions emerge from cold calculation. Every relationship becomes transactional. Every human connection is evaluated according to financial usefulness. In that sense, he represents the ultimate extension of commodification. People no longer possess inherent value.